I'll get this plate finished so that we can move on to doing the second plate.
I'm Taryn, this is Logan, and this is Max. Our life rarely goes as planned, and this story is no different. But we are determined to rebuild our beautiful steel boat, even stronger than she was before. And we're bringing you along with us.
So yesterday we were here for 10 hours from setup to cleanup to tack in that first new plate in the hull here.
Yeah, it was a tough job working overhead just with the angle of the boat and where it is. Like half of it was a little too high to reach and the other half was a little too low. It was a bit of a pain. Also, the 3/16 plate is a little bit, like it's pretty tough to bend.
Yeah, and there's more of a bend where on like the starboard side there than it looks like there is. So it was like pretty much that whole length of the starboard side there we had to have it bending along the hull, and it just did not want to go.
It was pretty difficult to bend it just with the dogs and wedges. It was bending but not in the way that we wanted it to.
Yeah, and sometimes bending the like hull plate that was already there, indenting it. So
yeah, it was putting dents in it. So like it's just thick enough where it resists bending pretty well, but just thin enough to be finicky. And it wasn't as easy as I'd hoped it was going to be, but pretty well perfect. I don't think the patch is going to be noticeable once it's all painted again. Most of it won't be faired because it is below the water line, but there is a little bit above that will be faired. Because there's already fairing on that part of the boat. So it was a difficult day, so hopefully today will go easier.
So the other thing about this job is that we're also using two different welders. We're using a stick welder and a MIG welder. And the reason that we're using the two different welders is basically that it's next to impossible to get the MIG welder in between the ribs up top, like we need to do to be able to actually do the welding properly.
Also, we would need to move our MIG welder up there, and our MIG welder...
Yeah, you guys know how it is. You've seen what a struggle it is getting the MIG welder up and down. And the stick welder has long enough cables that we can just drag them from the truck that has the welder on it up and into the aft cabin and aft blocker there without much of a problem. And then we can bend the sticks to where we need them to go in between stuff.
Alright, so for all of you non-welders, I'm going to explain to you what the difference is between the two kinds of welders that we're talking about here. First of the two welders that we're using is a stick welder, or a shielded metal arc welder, and the second is a MIG welder, or a metal inert gas welder. Stick welders literally use a stick of metal wrapped in a coating which shields the weld with a gas created when it burns. The stick goes in a stinger, and when the stick in the stinger touches metal, it completes an electrical circuit and melts the metal and the stick, creating a chemical bond between the stick and the metal. MIG welding, on the other hand, uses wire and inert gas from a bottle to create the weld. Wire flows from a spool in the machine through a hose to a gun and then to the metal. The gun has a nozzle on it which also funnels the inert gas from a bottle to the wire and weld, which shields the weld from impurities and allows the chemical bonding to happen properly. And that's the basics of it anyway. Both systems have their benefits and drawbacks, and we have used MIG for most of this rebuild, but using both systems seemed to work the best for this particular project.
So yesterday, while I was up top, I was tacking the plate onto the ribs and with the stick welder, and while Logan was down bottom doing all the tacks, he was using the MIG, and it's going to be the same thing today. So Logan's going to go up and he's going to weld the entire top of the plate with the stick welder, and it's also easier to weld with a gap with a stick than it is MIG, so that should go a lot smoother than if we were using the MIG. And then he's going to come down and kind of V out again all the way around the...
Is that the technical term?
I don't know. We've been using 3 different terms to talk about this. We're calling it chamfering, we're calling it beveling, and we're calling it V'ing out. Anyway, so he's gonna grind that all the way around and then come back and weld it with the MIG on the bottom so that we have for sure a nice solid weld on both sides and that plate is in there well. So it's gonna be a bit of work, but at least stick is fun. I think welding with stick is way more fun than welding with MIG.
I honestly miss welding with stick quite a bit, and I've finally got this welder like working to the point where it's good to go. Yeah, and thanks, Sean,
Yeah, thanks, Sean.
for letting us use all this stuff.
Yeah, it's off of the shop truck that Logan uses for work, the 2 days a week that he works for money.
So it's nice to be able to use that for personal.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, so we got to get to it. Gotta get this plate finished so that we can move on to doing the second plate.
The plate was tacked in, but we were far from out of the woods when it came to actually knowing if we had fixed our problem. Now we had to make sure we had welded solid enough that we hadn't actually created more holes in replacing the one that we had cut out.
Just like that, the interior's finished.
Even though Logan staggered his welds in order to spread the heat out and avoid warping, we still had warping happening in that top problem corner.
A little bit frustrated.
Because of the buckling or the warping?
Yeah, because I tried really hard to keep it from doing that. Yeah, and it's just hard to weld in there. It sucks. There's still a whole bunch more welding to do in there.
So basically what happens when you add a bunch of heat to metal is it expands and then it contracts. And sometimes, especially when you have a lot of heat in one area, it contracts a little bit more than it has expanded or than what was originally there, and you end up with the plate buckling or changing shape. So by having short welds instead of long welds, you put less heat into an area, and potentially or hopefully you get away from having the issue of the plate really changing shape too much and creating any kind of warping. But clearly we didn't quite beat it this time.
So this is what it's looking like from the inside. Welds look pretty nice. Still some slag on some of them, like that one.
I haven't chipped most of it.
No. Looks pretty good. On the ribs, we still got to come back and do more welding on the ribs as well as on the center line there. And also in here, Logan tried to fill those holes, but there's too much rust, so we're gonna have to figure out something to do to cover those holes. We'll probably just weld another plate on top, which won't get rid of the problem, but it will slow it down. And it might keep oxygen out, which should help at least, so I don't know. Gotta do what you gotta do to get back out on the water. But yeah, it's pretty exciting. Another plate back in. So what are we doing next? Do you want me to or needle gun it?
Yeah, just clean up all the weld with the needle gun, and make sure I haven't missed anything.
So what is it? What does hitting it with the needle gun do?
It takes some of the stress out of the weld. Like, I should have been doing it while it was hot, but I didn't have the airline up here, and I've already made too many trips up and down. And it just takes all the slag off so that you can see the weld.
Yeah.
It's not the, it's not the greatest thing, but I just basically want to do it fast and get this job done.
With the interior done, it was time to prep the outside for welding. The first step was to grind off the tacks. Next, Logan used a grinder to create a V-shape along the plate joints so that he could grind out any slag that was enclosed due to the stick welding, and then get good penetration when putting a bead in with the MIG welder. Usually we would bevel both plates before welding in the new one, but because the fitting was done while the plate was on the boat, this was nearly impossible to do, so it had to be done after. Not ideal, but it seemed to work.
Is it past your dinner time?
We welded in an entire plate, giant plate.
Fit this plate and welded it in. It was a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be, but I think it looks pretty good. And we have no holes.
Yay! I also just wanted to give a quick shout out to SV Blown Away, who have a unique steel catch that they have been sailing around for a lot longer than we have even been sailing. Their boat is steel with a plywood deck, and they're usually out sailing, but just created a few videos showing how they redid part of their chain locker. Check them out if you're jonesing for some more steel boat content and want to see a unique way of building a deck. And thanks so much for watching, liking, and subscribing. An extra big shout out to our patrons for coming along with us on this wild ride. See you next week.